In a life just full of weird encounters, I feel like this is the creepiest one that I've ever experienced. So, I was a single woman living alone at the time. My apartment building was isolated near the edge of town, where most of its neighboring property was a large empty field. I was about to go on a long trip, and I'd been up all night cleaning and packing and whatnot. A little before 6 a.m, I decided to get some laundry done, and it's critical to the story that you understand the structure of the building, so I apologize if this part's a little dull. But basically, all of the apartments opened up directly outside, like a motel, so there were no hallways or anything, and my apartment opened up on a fenced-in porch with stairs leading down to the street. The fence continued around the yard, and there was a drop-off of about 6 feet on the other side, meaning that the only way to get to and from my apartment was to go down those narrow cement stairs. The stairs opened up to an alley which you had to take in order to get to our building's laundry room. A single washer and dryer were available in a locked tiny space right behind the apartments. Now, I didn't want to keep going up and down the steps, so I wrestled a huge bag of laundry and made my way to the alley. And even though it was technically the morning, it was still pretty pitch black outside. There was a safety light attached to the building, but beyond that, the path was lit only by the moon and the stars. It was so quiet outside too that I scared myself by accidentally kicking a rock. In other words, there wasn't another soul around. So it took me maybe 2 minutes max to get the laundry into the washer, pour the soap, and deposit the coins. I locked the door behind me and headed back towards the alley again when I turned the corner and I froze. At the end of the alleyway, right in front of the only opening to the stairs, there was a woman standing with her back to me. Her body was stiff and unnatural, like a wind-up toy. Her feet were about a foot apart, and her arms were slightly lifted, straight out at her sides. Her head was up, but it was kind of jutting forward as if her neck were extra long or something. She didn't move or act like she heard my footsteps at all, and I immediately held my breath, going still myself. I waited for the woman to move, but she stayed like that, arms splayed, head crooked. She was completely blocking the way, and I'd have to slide past her to get to the stairs. Though she wasn't doing anything other than just standing in a creepy way, I had no idea why she was there or what she was capable of, so obviously I wanted to avoid confronting her. Unfortunately, though, I didn't have a lot of options. My cell phone was still inside because I hadn't expected the run to the laundry room to take more than a minute. I had my car keys, but my car was parked in front of the building, meaning that I'd have to walk past her to get to it. And so I just sat there for what felt like ages, heart pounding, mind racing. I was so freaked out that my eyes were watering, and all the while the woman just didn't so much as twitch. I debated knocking on a neighbor's door, but since she wasn't attacking me, I thought it might be stupid to wake people up. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or not, and I couldn't just stand around all night, right? So after a good amount of time, I decided to force myself to walk past her. And yes, this is the part of the horror film where I should have died. So I took slow, cautious steps towards her, and still, she was frozen. As I got closer, I kept expecting her to turn toward me, but with only a foot left between us, she still had it. I took a deep breath and began to slide by her until I could finally see her face. And I'll never forget the way that she looked. Her eyes were bulging wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead. Her jaw was completely slack, mouth open, almost unnaturally wide. Seeing her head hunch forward from the side was even more horrific than from the back, too, and I immediately thought that, should the zombie apocalypse be on the horizon, I was about to be one of the first victims. And then, she started to move. Not her body, just her head. Her shoulders remained stiff and slumped forward, her arms still straight at her sides, but her head, that head on her oddly long neck, began to just loll toward me. Her eyes didn't move, but she twisted until our gazes met. Her expression just completely unchanged, less than a foot away from me now. And that was it. I ran the rest of the way up the steps, and inside my apartment, I locked the door and stood against it for a long while just shaking from the encounter. And when I looked out of the peephole again, she was completely gone. But I waited until the sun was shining bright before I went back to get my laundry, I tell you that much. And after that, I stopped washing my clothes when it was dark out. When I was in grad school, I moved to a new state and picked a cheap apartment on the bus route to class without ever visiting the place first. The landlord was nice enough, and I felt comfortable going through the lease process via email with him. Once I got there, it seemed normal enough, if a bit dated, and it was in a quiet neighborhood, which was nice since I'd moved from rural Midwest to a 250,000 population city. Now, I don't know if the following experiences are isolated or related or have other explanations, but here's what happened. So from the get-go, I felt the need to sleep with the light on. I've never been one to need a light at night except maybe after a particularly scary movie, but for the entire year I lived there, that's exactly what I did. I felt particularly creeped out by the closet near the front door, and ideally, you'd store coats and a vacuum in there, but I just didn't use it, and I can't really explain why. The way it was situated relative to the rest of the room, it made the front door just really dark, and when I sat in the living room, I often felt like I was being watched from that area or something. I tried to avoid looking over there, but it always drew my eyes, and this was, in fact, the only way to leave my second-floor apartment, so I always rushed out quickly without looking and zoomed past the closet on my way in, again without looking. Now, I've dealt with many burnt-out bulbs in my day, but I've never lived somewhere where the bulbs actually shatter until I live there. It happened to a few in my bedroom. The second time it happened, I had the landlord check the wiring, and he had that replaced just to be on the safe side, but it persisted, so I just used lamps in there instead. But one night, I woke up and I immediately shut my eyes tight again because it honestly felt like something was weighing down the bed beside me. Like it was actually sagging, but there wasn't anything physical there, and I had this thought that if I just didn't look, that it might leave. I kept my eyes shut for several moments and then felt the weight just leave the bed. Another night, I experienced what is probably best described as sleep paralysis. Well, kind of anyway. So I woke up completely terrified with my blanket over my head. This happened a lot here. I think even subconsciously I was hiding from this thing in my apartment. And I actually could move, which is why I don't think sleep paralysis is quite what it was, but I was too scared to move, so I just sat there. I slowed down my breathing, and then I heard a second something breathing, slightly out of sync with my own. I held my breath to see if my tired brain was just playing tricks, but the breathing continued. I don't know how long I laid there with my blanket over my head just listening to this other breathing, but it did eventually stop. There's other instances too like this, but those are the ones that stand out in my mind the most. I moved out after my lease was up, and when I was moving out, a neighbor that I occasionally made small talk with commented on my moving, and I said something along the lines of, "Yeah, the place is creepy anyway," to which he responded that he agreed and then admitted that he always took the long way to the laundry room to avoid my part of the hallway. It was just a really strange time for me, and since then I haven't had anything else happen. This happened roughly 3 years ago when I was working for a small non-profit for mental health in Little Rock. I no longer work there, so I feel more comfortable sharing this, and honestly, typing out my last experience was cathartic for me, so here goes. Our organization is statewide, but our HQ was quite small. At the time, there were only 3 of us working at the office, and when this all went down, only my boss and I were in. We were already quite stressed out because we had learned just days earlier that a recently fired board member had been stalking my boss. She doesn't get scared easily, and our job has us interacting with people who have done some seriously disturbing things, but this sufficiently creeped her out. So I was hyperprotective, definitely to a fault. Luckily, I had my work cut out for me, as the whole building and complex had cameras at every angle that our landlord checked regularly. So it was around 2 in the afternoon, and the day had slowed down considerably. I took the opportunity to clean my office, since I could never keep it organized for long, and once I'd filled up 2 massive trash bags worth of junk and old papers, I decided to step outside and make the short walk to take the trash out. Now, when I say our organization is tiny, I'm talking we take out our own trash and clean our entire building up tiny. I knew what my boss's stalker looked like and was fully prepared to deal with him, should he be on the premises or anything like that. And our front door was kept locked, and I locked it back up as soon as I stepped outside. And my head was on a swivel the whole time. If I could have turned my head like an owl, I undoubtedly would have. I knew that I could mop the floor with this guy should he try anything, but I wasn't exactly going out searching for him or anything. But just kind of looking out for my boss was my goal. On the way back to the office, I was happy to see only employees from the other offices outside. I turned the left corner towards my office door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. But before I could close the door, someone was directly behind me and said with impatience, "I'm here to get Michael. Where's Michael?" He said it so fast that I didn't immediately register what he'd just said. I'd actually jumped out of shock too. I mean, how the hell did this guy get behind me so quickly? All the cars in the parking lot were cars that I recognized too, and my spidey senses, they were definitely flaring up. I'm 6 feet tall, and this man was right up there with my height. He looked super thin too, which is saying a lot coming from me, but he looked intensely frustrated. It was the beginning of fall, and he had a big jacket on and a do-rag, clothing one rarely wears when it's still 80 degrees outside. He gave no regards to personal space, so I had to back away from him a bit, causing him to come even further inside. Noticing this, I stood my ground at this point. I told him that nobody named Michael works here and that we're not a service provider. And that was clearly the last thing he wanted to hear, because that only pissed him off. He began raising his voice and shouting, "I know one of y'all has Michael. Where the hell is Michael?" And all I could say to him was that I have no idea who Michael is. I asked him if he was lost, how old he was, and what he looked like, and none of those questions got answered. He then said to me in just an absolutely enraged way that I was just over there, pointing to another facility just a stone's throw to the east, and they told me the same stuff. I know he's here, you're all telling me bullcrap. My efforts to calm him down were ineffective at best, and I started getting frustrated myself, but that feeling quickly turned to concern when I saw the grip of a handgun sticking out of his jacket pocket. Everything then clicked. I finally understood what I was 90% sure that I was dealing with at that moment. It also hit me that I was trapped. He was standing in the way of our exit, and my boss could have exited through the back door, but she was in her office and didn't know what was going on. I wasn't about to make a mad dash to the exit and leave her, so my only option was to fight back, if it came down to that. I took a few steps towards the guy, ready to crash into his hand if he makes any motion to draw. I disarmed plenty of rubber and unloaded guns, but the fear of permanent damage and/or death puts a lot into perspective, that's for sure. Finally, though, my boss stepped out of her office to see what was going on. I honestly don't remember what the man was shouting after I saw the gun, but he had not calmed down. I was just too laser-focused on his right arm at this point. My boss was met with the same responses and roadblocks that I'd gotten regarding this Michael fellow, and despite all the stuff that had been going on with her former board member stalking her and whether or not she'd seen the gun too, my boss made the ballsiest decision that I think I've ever seen. To say I'm thankful that we were in sync to make this work is putting it mildly too. Displaying complete control and confidence, my boss told the man, "I think you may be looking for so-and-so facility just down here and to the left. I'm so sorry that you were given bad directions, but it's in this complex. Let me walk you over there right now." And she walked him out the door and to the said facility, and as soon as they were out the door, I knew what to do. I called the facility and warned them that my boss, whom they knew well, was walking a man over to their facility and that he was armed and looking for someone named Michael. Given that this facility serves a lot of patients under Act 911, there's almost always at least one police officer over there too. When I saw the gun in his jacket, I came to the conclusion that this was an attempted hit on Michael, whoever that was. Gang activity has plagued Little Rock since the 90s, and at one point, it had the most murders per capita in all of the US. During the early 2000s, it calmed down considerably, but within the past 5 or so years, gang violence has resurged in the city. Furthermore, I've had prior experiences in Kansas with gang violence when a hitman came to our middle school to kill the son of a rival gang member, in broad daylight, mind you. Luckily, he never made it inside, though. That means that in both instances, though, this was meant to be a message to the other gang. He wasn't hiding his face, he had no backup, and his face was on all the cameras. My guess is that he'd already made plans to go to prison and thrive there, but I don't know enough about gang life to say for certain what his follow-up was going to be. But what had me terrified at that moment was that my boss was right in the middle of the danger now. I panicked after calling the facility and stayed in the office, and I'm kind of ashamed that I did that, to be honest. My boss returned after a certain amount of time, but I actually don't remember the duration. She didn't tell me anything new, only that she'd let him there and thanked me for calling them. She hadn't seen the gun in his jacket, but she too knew that something was just not right about him when she got a good look at him in her office. She said that she went to mother hen mode by leading the danger away from her coop. And he clearly had been given bad directions, which was mildly amusing. To be fair though, doing a Google Maps search of that road shows a misleading display of everything on that small street. To the left of our office, there are roughly 40 yards of trees that separate our complex from the facility that he pointed to. So I guess he was just coming out of the tree line as I was unlocking the door because I didn't see him coming. My boss didn't tell me about any new information the next day, and I checked the police beat for a few weeks to see if anything was written about it. Thankfully, I didn't see anything in the police beat about it, which means that there was no one harmed. Well, that we know of anyway. However, we worked with and trained LEOs in crisis intervention, and they would sometimes give us some inside info, like where so-and-so was or wasn't safe, where gang activity was increasing, all that sort of stuff. One lieutenant that I worked with a lot eventually confirmed too that the man was, in fact, trying to kill Michael over gang disputes. I don't know what his relation was to the would-be hitman beyond that, especially why my mental health patient was a target, but hey, we may have saved someone's life that day, so that's good. I have my own theories about the whole thing if anyone's curious to know, but I'm also curious to know what you all think. If any of you guys have any theories about this whole mess, if you guys have any questions, I'll try to answer them the best of my knowledge. Anyway, I guess the lesson here is to just stay the hell away from gangs. My bus route was really long. Anywhere between 1 and 2 hours, in fact, and I was one of the last stops too. It was on a really rural route with lots of mountains, dirt roads, and holloways. Being a rural area, most of these hollows were long, windy roads that families and relatives lived on, and normally just 1 or 2 families of kids to be dropped off at the same points. This meant that if a particular family of kids didn't ride the bus that day for whatever reason, that the bus driver could skip that hollow and save us anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes off the total route. And how could this ever be a bad thing, right? Well, one particular hollow, about 5 miles long, had only 2 stops, 2 different families, but the second family lived at the furthest point. It was easily 3 to 4 miles past the first family's drop-off point, down a crooked dead-end single-lane dirt road. It was always the worst part of the route each time. Now, on the days the second family did not ride the bus, if the bus driver skipped driving all the way to the second family's house, then it would save us about 20 minutes on the round trip, not to mention the stress of driving in the claustrophobic dirt road in a huge hulking school bus. There were also times the family waited to pick up the kids in their own car at the first drop-off to save the bus time and spare it the experience of driving up that road. So, of course, when they could, the driver would turn around at the first family's drop-off point. However, this was not as smooth a turn as going the full way to the second family's house. This drop-off point was a small circular area with a couple of different driveways sprawling off, only one of which was large enough for a school bus to fit, and definitely not big enough for a bus to do a 360 turn in one swoop. But with the help of one of the larger driveways, a 3-point turn could get us out of there pretty easy. At most, the bus needed 2 meters of this driveway space and hardly 30 seconds of its time. We do this happily for as long as I can remember, really, until either new residents moved in or the existing residents of the trailer in this driveway, about 20 meters away, just lost their minds one day. Suddenly, there's a large red farm gate at the extreme end of the driveway, but no possible way for the bus to turn around when closed, and for the first few months, whenever we would cut this route short by turning there, the driver would stop the bus during the 3-point turn, open the gate, barely reverse into the driveway, pull out, stop the bus again, close the gate back exactly as it was, and get back on the bus and carry on saving us all around 20 minutes of needless driving. But keep in mind, this only happened when the second family either did not ride the bus or was being picked up at this point, aka not very often. Then, one day, we turn up and there's no lock on the gate, which we're all a bit weirded out by, I must admit. So we drive the 20 minutes and we carry on. Still, each time we have the chance to turn, the driver would check if it were unlocked, and I don't know if it was ever requested to leave it unlocked, but I know from the driver's reactions that they wanted it to be that way. So if it did happen to be unlocked, we would take the shortcut and the driver would put the gate back as it was. To my knowledge, no one ever complained about this too. But then comes the day of the trap. We get to the first drop-off. The second family was not riding the bus, nothing looks amiss except, hey, what do you know, the gate's open. I can remember the smile on the driver's face as she put the bus into reverse and begins the turn. At this point in the ride, it's just myself and 3 to 4 other kids, only one being a grade above me, and I was barely 6 years old. Of course, I was chattering away with my friend and didn't notice at first that we'd stopped. Once I did start to look around, however, to my confusion, there was an assortment of ATVs, 4-wheelers side-by-sides, and actual cars that had pulled out of the driveway to surround the bus. And it was every single direction too. To make it even more confusing and, thinking back, horrific, they all had an assortment of firearms. Now, I'm 6 and I grew up around guns. I wasn't scared by what I saw, but I also didn't realize I was being held hostage at gunpoint. All I remember is the feeling of profound confusion of not being able to work out, A, why we're sitting here, B, what are these people doing, and C, why are the other kids crying? Maybe I was blissfully ignorant, but the driver told us to just play on the floor and not look out the windows. So, me being me, I propped my jacket up over the window in my seat and told everyone that we could play under my row, and I ended up having a great, albeit slightly boring, time just waiting. It went on for what felt like hours, and I never looked out the window during it, but I'm sure it was only maybe an hour at most, give or take, because our parents slowly started showing up looking for us. I remember 2 kids being allowed off before me, and then, as I was growing truly bored, my grandfather showed up to save me too. He came onto the bus, spoke to the driver, and held my hand as we walked back to his truck. And no one else was saying a word except my cheery goodbye to the driver. I remember all of the gang just staring her down as I walked away, and she never moved from her seat the entire ordeal. I don't know what happened after I left, and it was only later that I grew up to realize the severity of the event. I know for sure that my grandfather and parents called the school system, but I never heard of any punishment or follow-up. The gate was never left open again, and we still had to drive that route each day, always driving it all the way through, except for those blissful days both families of kids just didn't ride and we could skip it altogether. The same bus driver stayed on the route, and she was honestly an angel to remain so calm and collected throughout that whole ordeal. So, I want to share some stories with you guys. I have about 5 or 6 that stick out to me the most, and those are the ones that I want to share. So, some years back, I was watching TV with my mum in her room and my cousin. My mum asked me to get her a cup of water, and so I did, got the cup and began walking back to her room, and as I was about to exit the living to go into the hallway, someone just grabbed the bottom right of my shirt and whispered, "It's going to be all right." But when I felt it and I heard it, I turned around, obviously, and there was no one there. At the time, I took what the person said to heart and walked back into my mum's room, where I found my cousin hiding under the blanket and my mum telling me to hurry into the room. I told her what had happened, and she said that as I went through the living room toward the kitchen, that she could see what looked like someone following behind me. Now, where I live, there is a park across the street from my house, and we were celebrating my younger brother's birthday at the park at some stage, and I really needed to go to the restroom and didn't like how gross the ones in the park were, so I asked my mum for the keys to the house so that I could use ours. I go to the house and lock the door behind me, and I sat on the toilet ready to do my business when I heard what sounded like hooves clopping in the living room, like a horse or something prancing around or something. I sat there confused until it stopped in front of the restroom, and I said, "Who is it?" And then I heard 2 voices at the exact moment, one of a girl and the other really deep, but they sounded like they came from the same person almost. But the voices shouted, "Get out" at me, and so I put my pants back up and opened the door and looked toward the front entrance door, and I saw it fling open the door and then slam shut. At this point, I began crying and just sat outside for a few minutes because I just had no idea what happened. I wanted to know so bad who or what it was that I remember saying as a kid that if you show me who you are, I'll let you play on my Super Nintendo. Now, I also suffer through sleep paralysis a lot, but mainly when I sleep on my back. My sleep paralysis consists of me just basically still having my eyes closed and unable to move. I don't see figures or anything like that. What happens to me, though, is that I feel myself get dragged from the back of my neck to the top corner of my room above my bed. I can feel the bumps and the coldness of the wall behind me, and sometimes, if it's not just being held up there, I get dragged along the ceiling as well. So this one day, I was asleep in daytime, and I had my eyes open during my sleep paralysis episode, except this time I was dragged on the floor and made to face the direction of the front door. For a better understanding of this, my room is a makeshift room created in what used to be the dining room. So it's my room, and then the kitchen, and then the living room. And as I laid there on the floor, I could remember feeling the small rocks and the dirt on my face. After a bit, I heard my mum's car come home, and I knew it was her because of a certain whining noise it does when pulling in. So I saw her come into the house and tried to shout out to her, but she was on her phone and didn't see me to the right on the floor. Obviously, I'm in a sleep paralysis episode. She walked past me into her room, and I saw everything that she wore, and a few seconds later I got dragged back into my bed, and I got up and ran straight to my mum. But the thing is that she was in the house still on the phone, and she was wearing exactly what I saw her wearing when I was on the floor. I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but it was really creepy. Another night, when I was asleep, I had a dream that I was in a room and someone walked in just looking in my direction and smiling while they walked to my TV to turn it on. After they did, they just walked out and locked my door. In my head, I knew that he was putting on a screamer video, so I ended up going under my blanket and just covering my ears. I was right about that too, because the screams, they just wouldn't stop. I woke up from my dream and I could hear the screaming still in my room, so I bolted out to find my brothers asleep on the floor in the living room, and I looked across the hallway to see my mum awake staring at me. She told me to just sleep with my brothers, and when I woke up, I obviously told my mum what had happened, and she said that she heard the woman screaming in my room too, since my room shares a wall with hers. I thought at the time that I was like residual dreaming or something, and the scream was still in my head while I was fully waking up. But my mum said that she heard the scream too. She said at the time that she told me to sleep in the living room because, well, if a demon wanted me, it could take her instead. Also, I moved to North Cell 3 years ago, away from all my family members. There was one cousin I used to be very close to when we were kids as well. I was 4 years older than her, but we hung out together all the time during the gatherings until I stopped going around the age of 16. So fast forward 11 years of us not talking anymore or even seeing each other, since I don't go to family gatherings anymore, and I had a dream some cousins and I were driving in a car near my grandma's house in Mex. We stopped the block before reaching her house and she gets out. I'm sitting there wondering why she got out of the car so soon, and I ask my cousin who's driving, and he says that she's not coming with us anymore. We begin to drive away, and I stick my head out of the window and I see her crying and waving goodbye. I wave bye back to her confused and sad look, and when I wake up in the morning, I get a call from my dad while I'm getting ready to go to work. He tells me that she just died in the morning during complications trying to give birth. But keep in mind, I speak to no one outside of my immediate family, and I didn't even know that she was pregnant, much less about to give birth. And to be honest, I never really thought about her or dreamt of her ever before. And this reminds me of one that I was going to brush aside, but it's a bit similar, so I'll just add it. So, I was hanging out at a friend's house with 3 other people. Around 6, I got this terrible feeling that something happened to my dad or someone's dad, and I told them to just do me a favor and call their dads to make sure everything was okay, and I did the same. Nothing was wrong, so I felt a little better and a little embarrassed, but I just couldn't really enjoy the night because I just felt wrong inside. When I got home and go on Discord to talk to a friend of mine, he ended up telling me that his dad got into a really bad car accident and died. And those are the 5 most memorable moments of spooky things that have happened to me.